The air inside the recruiting station in Oak Haven, Ohio, carried the stagnant scent of floor wax and stale coffee. Outside the window, the quiet streets reflected a Rust Belt reality where options for young people were shrinking down to low-wage retail shift work or staying stuck at home. Inside, Staff Sergeant Marcus Vance sat illuminated by the cold blue light of his monitor, watching a red status bar that highlighted his station's failing monthly quota. A decade prior, joining the military was viewed locally as a clear, honorable rite of passage that offered guaranteed economic mobility and respect. Now, the glossy brochures featuring tactical gear and high-tech equipment sat untouched on the waiting room tables, ignored by a generation that viewed the institution with deep skepticism. The recruitment crisis was no longer just a set of statistics on a Pentagon briefing slide. It was a daily reality of empty chairs and unanswered messages. Young adults walking past the station were increasingly disqualified long before even setting foot inside, filtered out by rising rates of chronic health issues, lack of physical conditioning, or prior minor legal offenses. Beyond the physical disqualifiers lay a deeper cultural rift. Many local families, having watched older relatives return from decades of foreign conflict with unaddressed trauma or physical injuries, actively discouraged their children from enlisting. For Marcus, every high school career fair had turned into an uphill battle against widespread apathy, systemic distrust, and a complete shift in how young Americans envisioned their futures. When the front door finally chimed and a young man stepped inside, the tension in the room remained thick. The teenager moved cautiously, holding his backpack tightly against his chest like a barrier, his body language revealing a mixture of financial desperation and intense hesitation. He was driven into the office not by a desire for military glory, but by the harsh pressure of cut work hours and impending rent payments. Yet, as Marcus prepared to walk him through the basic enlistment process, the underlying obstacles immediately surfaced. The young man carried the physical toll of an inactive lifestyle and the heavy weight of family warnings against trusting military promises. Standing in the quiet office, the two embodied the modern enlistment dilemma. A military struggling to maintain its numbers, and a prospective generation caught between economic necessity and a profound reluctance to serve. The initial screening at the Regional Processing Center in Columbus felt less like the entrance to a military career and more like an industrial assembly line designed to turn applicants away. Marcus sat in the waiting area while Jalen went through the preliminary medical and cognitive evaluations. The room was filled with dozens of young men and women, all staring silently at their phones or at the floor. A decade ago, this room would have been buzzing with nervous energy and patriotism. Now it felt like a waiting room for a medical diagnosis, heavy with anxiety over strict automated standards that seemed built for a different era. Inside the examination rooms, the harsh reality of the modern recruitment gap revealed itself in data points. The medical personnel moved systematically through their checklists, flagging even the smallest historical markers in digital health records. Past prescriptions for childhood anxiety, mild asthma from years ago, or minor sports injuries automatically triggered hard stops in the system. For Jalen, the physical assessment quickly became a series of hurdles. Years of processed diets, sedentary routines, and lack of access to regular preventive health care showed up immediately in elevated blood pressure readings and a complete lack of stamina during the basic cardiovascular tests. Beyond the physical limitations lay the academic and background filters. The standardized testing rooms saw high failure rates not because the applicants lacked intelligence, but because the basic math and reading comprehension sections exposed the deep educational inequities of underfunded public school systems. Furthermore, automated background checks flagged minor juvenile infractions and financial debts, treating them as major security risks. Marcus watched through the glass partition as recruiter after recruiter received bad news from the processing officers, watching weeks of outreach effort evaporate over a single flagged medical file or a failed practice exam. By mid-afternoon, the casualty rate of the enlistment process was starkly visible. Out of the 20 applicants who had entered the building that morning, more than half had already been turned away. disqualified by rigid system parameters that had not adapted to the health, educational, and social realities of 21st century American youth. Jalen emerged back into the waiting area, holding a folder thick with medical waiver paperwork, his face a mix of relief and profound embarrassment. He was not rejected outright, but he had been placed into a limbo of bureaucratic delays, required to prove his physical fitness and clear medical history before the military would even consider letting him sign a contract. The administrative limbo dragged on for months, transforming what was once a straightforward enlistment process into an exhausting test of endurance. Marcus spent his mornings navigating the labyrinthine medical waiver portal at his desk, submitting endless stacks of pharmacy records, high school transcripts, and doctor attestations for Jalen. Every single document required official stamps and digital signatures, only to sit for weeks in a backlogged federal database. For Marcus, the frustration was twofold. While his commanders demanded higher monthly numbers to fill depleted ranks, the military's own bureaucratic apparatus seemed engineered to reject the very population currently available to serve. For Jalen, the delay created a dangerous window of doubt. As the weeks turned into months, the initial economic pressure that pushed him toward the recruiting office began to collide with intense social feedback. Friends from his neighborhood openly questioned his decision, viewing military service not as a path to self-improvement, but as an outdated trap that favored the institution over the individual. Online, his social media feeds were filled with commentary highlighting political division within the armed forces, veterans speaking out about unaddressed trauma, and debates over cultural reforms in the ranks. The military was no longer seen by his peers as a neutral national institution, but as a polarized political battleground. This cultural friction extended into Jalen's own family. During Sunday dinners, his uncle, a veteran carrying the quiet weight of unhealed physical and psychological wounds, served as a living reminder of the potential cost of service. The conversations were nonverbal but heavy, marked by tight-lipped silence whenever Marcus called with updates about the waiver progress. Jalen found himself pulled between two realities: the immediate struggle of low-wage civilian life with no clear future, and the intimidating prospect of stepping into a system that his community increasingly viewed with skepticism and suspicion. By the time the medical waiver was finally approved, clearing Jalen to proceed to the physical conditioning prep course, the psychological landscape had shifted. Marcus could see it in the young man's posture when he returned to the station to sign the final paperwork. The eagerness born of financial necessity had been replaced by a guarded, weary pragmatism. Jalen was willing to step across the threshold, but he was doing so without the traditional sense of idealism or pride that had sustained generations of recruits before him. The system had accepted him, but only after exposing the profound disconnect between the military's expectations and the complex social reality of the young Americans it sought to enlist. The transition from the recruiting office to Fort Moore was an immediate collision between expectations and the uncompromising realities of military life. Jalen found himself embedded in a basic training company that reflected the full spectrum of America's recruitment crisis. The barracks were filled with a starkly divided demographic. A small group of recruits from multi-generational military families and a vast majority who, like Jalen, had enlisted primarily out of financial necessity or lack of local options. From the very first week, the physical and mental strain exposed the deep gaps in preparation that the military was now forced to bridge on its own dime. Instead of immediate combat training, a significant portion of the initial weeks had to be dedicated to remedial conditioning, nutrition education, and basic academic preparation. Drill sergeants faced an unprecedented challenge, balancing traditional discipline with new guidelines designed to lower injury rates and prevent early dropouts among recruits who lacked basic physical conditioning. Marcus, keeping track of Jalen's progress from his desk back in Ohio, watched the weekly status reports with a mix of relief and concern. Jalen was managing to adapt, but many in his unit were not plagued by stress fractures, mental fatigue, and a deep-seated resistance to the hierarchical, unyielding nature of military life. As the weeks progressed, the underlying social and ideological tensions of the civilian world began to bleed through the uniform ranks. Discussions in the barracks late at night rarely touched on abstract ideals of duty or national defense. Instead, recruits debated the rising cost of living, political polarization back home, and the uncertain value of their contracts. For the instructors and officers, the challenge extended far beyond simply graduating these recruits through the gates. The harder battle was convincing them to stay past their first enlistment, as corporate recruiters actively targeted trained military personnel with higher pay, flexible working conditions, and none of the rigid institutional constraints. By the time Jalen reached the final stages of basic training, the grueling multi-day field exercise designed to forge teamwork under extreme stress, he had transformed physically, but his mindset remained distinct from previous generations. He had proven he could endure the physical demands, yet his allegiance to the institution remained transactional and cautious. Standing on the parade field during the final dress rehearsal, surrounded by a company that had lost nearly 20% of its original cohort to medical and administrative discharges, Jalen embodied the new reality of the armed forces. A resilient survivor of a system struggling to retain its human core in a rapidly changing society. The graduation ceremony on the dusty parade field at Fort Moore was marked by rows of perfectly aligned boots and the sharp, rhythmic snap of dress uniforms in the wind. From the bleachers, family members cheered, their voices echoing across the grounds. Marcus stood near the edge of the stands, having driven through the night from Ohio to witness the final transformation of a recruit who had once almost been written off by an unyielding system. As the company was dismissed with a final collective shout, the crowd surged forward, creating a sea of tearful embraces, photos, and quiet relief. When Jalen finally spotted Marcus in the crowd, the contrast between his current posture and the hesitant teenager who had walked into the Oak Haven office months ago was undeniable. Standing taller, leaner, and wearing the clear marks of hard-earned discipline, Jalen shook Marcus's hand with a firm, practiced grip. Yet, behind the pride of accomplishment lay no illusions. Jalen knew that the uniform did not erase the structural struggles waiting for him back home, nor did it guarantee smooth sailing in an institution still navigating its own internal identity crisis and shifting global missions. For Marcus, watching Jalen prepare for his first operational assignment was both a victory and a sobering reminder of the long road ahead. The Army had successfully filled one more slot in its ranks, but the process had required extraordinary effort, endless bureaucracy, and a total overhaul of traditional training methods just to bring one capable young adult through the door. Out in the civilian world, millions of young Americans remained disconnected from the concept of public service, separated from the military by cultural divides, physical disqualifications, and a deep-seated distrust of large institutions. As Jalen loaded his duffel bag into the trunk of his family's car, taking a final look back at the barracks before heading toward his new life, the true nature of the modern military crisis stood fully revealed. The challenge was never just about numbers on a recruiter's spreadsheet or slogans on a promotional poster. It was about the evolving social contract between a nation and its defenders. The military had managed to claim its newest soldier, but to survive the coming decade, it would have to find a way to rebuild trust with a generation that demanded a purpose worth serving. The story of Jalen and Sergeant Vance isn't just a fictional scenario, it is a direct reflection of what is happening inside the U.S. military right now. The armed forces are standing at a major crossroads. On one side are the rigid bureaucratic standards and high-tech demands of the 21st century. On the other is a new demographic reality, declining physical readiness among youth, and a deep crisis of trust in major institutions. The U.S. is fighting to maintain its standing as the world's premier military force, but its most vital resource, its people, is becoming harder to enlist and even harder to retain. What do you think? Can the American military adapt to fit this new generation, or is this recruitment crisis only going to get worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story and analysis valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the algorithm push this content out to more people. And for those of you who would like to support the channel directly so I can keep bringing you deep dives like this, you can drop a contribution via PayPal at paypal.me/MikhailuXavier. The link is also down in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.